Well, a funny thing happened after I recorded this video and I started working on my Dev Zero code. I realized I forgot right at the end here. And let me just move over to the file that I had modified to show you just, again, the pre-learning on functions. I forgot a really important piece in this conversation. And it's a classic conversation about, and this is kind of what I hinted to, local versus global variables, let's just say in Python, right? Okay. So regardless of, and you'll learn the terminology, but if you do something like I did here, where I defined these variables and then I ran a function that updated them, be careful. And again, I blame this on JavaScript, but because we don't have this, it's like if you use a variable inside of a function that has already been declared somewhere, it then goes what we call the chain, the scope chain. But it's all good. But this code is broken. Actually, this rock, scissors, paper day 6 final is broken because I didn't do this step. So it's pretty important that I follow up. Again, we don't have to do this for this day 2 learn together, but I want to just get it in your understanding, or at least be introduced to these concepts because you may run into them. So let me just show you what I mean. And again, the debugging tools can be really great here. So I'm going to set a breakpoint because remember, I set up 2 functions right at the end. Oh, by the way, this too. Camel case is a styling of first word to, if you have a 2-word variable or function name. In JavaScript, we typically use camel case, but in Python, it's probably better. You can still totally use it, right? But it's more, and I think it's more PEP 8 compliant, if I could say that here. But anyway, let's go back down here. So let's say I set a breakpoint that will happen inside of this get choices, which would be, and let's just go ahead and run it. Let's go ahead and do a run and debug, right? So what's happened here is I've set the variables of player choice and random choice both to 0 out on the global scope. I can see it setting out here on the global scope, right? There they are. There's also just the output here. But if I step into this and then I ask the user, oh, hey, which one do you want? Well, I want scissors, right? So here, boom, it's scissors. Okay. If I step into it, then the random choice, and by the way, if you noticed last time, well, in the last video, I kept saying, why is there a tie? It's because of this. So I laugh because this is just part of what happens for me when I do multiple languages. And, I apologize that I didn't catch it the first time, but it happens. So now I just print the 2 out, right? And I leave, and this is the key, is once I print them and I leave, right? What happens is, because at this point, and I probably should, let's do that again. Let's do that one more time. Okay, setting a breakpoint here, right here. Let's do scissors again. Right? Paper choice here is 1. Paper choice there, interestingly enough, it kind of fools you to think because it is saying, well, the variable has been updated. And now it's saying, oh, yeah, it's here. It shows 2. But watch what happens to these as soon as we leave the function. Okay, let's just scroll back up, right? Right, goes back to 0. That's because when you're going to update global variables, you have to do update player choice. And let's say we're going to update random choice. Here. So all you're doing is you're saying when inside of this variable, when I'm saying update, or in this case, if I don't say it, it's saying I'm going to create a variable inside of this scope of this function. Now this gets a little more complicated than I wanted for our discussion, but it's okay as well. It's part of what happens. The next thing we'll talk about, and I'll probably do this next week, is as I was looking at my code, I ended up setting up the random variables, and I'll talk about that when I do the week 3 attendance, or sorry, global variables. And I did it in such a way. But, I just at least want you to be able to understand the basics of functions, but I want you to know this because you will run into it if what you're trying to do is what I showed in here. Okay. One of the ways, and by the way, there's a whole discussion in computer science about, because strict computer science students will often just like freak out when they have to set up a global variable because it's like a big no-no. And I would say in general, we tried to move away from it. And there's other ways like passing variables around. But just know it's okay at this point in your learning to set up global variables. But the last thing I'll say on this is one of the ways you can do this is you can actually capitalize. Um, and why would you do that? Is because you can clearly see that those are global variables. It's like a visual hint. And it's a styling thing. Like I was playing around with, I'll just show you, I was playing around with my code for my EV charging. And so I have a whole section of global constant values and actually more just global values. So anyway, I just wanted to follow up because I realized in doing this that I had shown you something incorrectly. And I just want to end with saying this is that you don't necessarily have to define these global variables. You can just set up functions that just do work and reference a variable that's already been set somewhere else. But if you want to play around with this idea of setting up global variables, it's also a good practice. But basically, also, that's a nice thing about capitalizing them is you can clearly see them. And as you become, and by the way, look at the editor trying to say, hey, what are you doing here? That's not out there. It's like, yeah, it's no longer out there because I changed the syntax. But know that there's a larger discussion that happens around programming of trying to minimize the amount of global variables. But in the beginning of your process, it happens and it's okay. So hopefully this didn't create any frustration, but maybe hopefully I got here before any of you did. So anyway, thanks. Talk to you later.